The years in between 1995 and 2000 in relation to video games were referred to as the fifth console generation, and this was a time of great technological innovation. Such innovation would be found in the form of the standardization of 3D game development. This was a drastic transitionary period where most game companies had to either change with the times to stay relevant, or risk being left behind. This meant that many high-caliber game franchises such as Mega Man, The Legend of Zelda, Super Mario, and many other franchises that were first created in the 2D perspective were being pushed into the third dimension. While many games that made this transition are now remembered for their innovations to the industry we know today, just as many are now considered cash-in projects that jumped on the bandwagon too early. It was certainly an opportune time to develop 2D games, as many development studios were already adept at developing solid games in such a way with over 2 decades of experience. Taking advantage of new hardware, developers could push their 2D games much further than ever before. The newly formed Oddworld Inhabitants team was hard at work on bringing their debut project, Oddworld Abe's Oddysee, to the world. A game that stands tall as one of the most well-received and recognizable 2D platformers of its time. Having been released fairly early in the original PlayStation's life cycle in 1997, Oddworld Abe's Oddysee shared many established design aspects from previous gaming generations, namely the 16-bit generation. When stacked up to latter year releases of the Super Nintendo just a few years prior, Abe's Oddysee is arguably comparable to titles such as Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario RPG in terms of pre-rendered visual style, while its gameplay can be compared to games such as Prince of Persia and Another World for its strategic platforming. However, for whatever Abe's Oddysee borrows in its visual style and playstyle, it more than makes up for in its unmistakable world building and deep atmosphere. The player takes on the role of the protagonist Abe.
Hello.
The hard-working Rupture Farms employee tasked at freeing his fellow race of Mudokons from the grasp of the slave-driving Gluckons of Rupture Farms. Having discovered that the mainstay meat products that Rupture Farms produces are in jeopardy due to declining species population from over-farming and, in turn, rapidly decreasing profits, the higher-ups of Rupture Farms decide to cut their losses and simply farm the Mudokon people themselves, effectively processing their own employees into meat products. Having overheard the plans set out by the higher-ups, Abe attempts to save as many Mudokons from Rupture Farms as he can. One of the main gameplay features that Abe's Oddysee boasts is Abe's chanting powers, which allow the player to take control of enemies for the purposes of rigging or setting off environmental traps, or dispatching other enemies that may otherwise be in the player's path. Apart from his chanting ability, Abe has no other means of self-defense, leaving him open to enemy attacks unless the environment can work in the player's favor. The game's variety of environments are diverse and covered in detail mixed with gripping atmosphere. From the cold industrial factories of Rupture Farms to the lush, mysterious, and treacherous landscapes of Oddworld, each section of the game has its own unique, picturesque feel to it, which is largely due to the game working on a screen-by-screen basis, meaning that once the player walks off screen, they'll be in an entirely different situation, which keeps the players on their toes and prevents repetition.